Jake Harper wiped the sweat from his forehead and checked his scanner for the third time in 2 minutes. The reading still didn't make any sense. The derelict ship floating in the Theta sector wasn't just old. It was ancient. The kind of ancient that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Pre-contact era, maybe even older than that. The metal under his boots felt wrong somehow, like it was made from something that shouldn't exist. His captain, a four-armed Solarian named Vex, had been acting weird since they'd first detected the vessel 3 hours ago. Vex was usually greedy but predictable. Today he was greedy and nervous. That combination never meant anything good for the crew. Jake's boots echoed in the empty corridor as he pushed deeper into the ship. The air tasted stale through his helmet's filters, like nothing had breathed here in centuries. His flashlight cut through the darkness, but it felt like the shadows were fighting back, swallowing the light almost as fast as he could shine it. Harper, go deeper. Check the power core. Vex's voice crackled through the comm, sounding too casual. Too relaxed. Copy that, Captain, Jake replied, his gut telling him something was wrong. Real wrong. The walls around him were covered in strange metallic patterns that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. They almost looked organic, like veins running through living tissue. Jake had been a salvage mechanic for 8 years, working on ships from dozens of different species, and he'd never seen anything like this. He turned a corner, and his thermal scanner suddenly lit up like a Christmas tree. The small screen filled with red and orange blobs. Massive heat signatures. Dozens of them. Moving in the shadows ahead. Living things. Big living things. Jake's heart started hammering against his ribs. Captain, we've got company down here. Big signatures. Multiple contacts. We should pull back in. He never finished the sentence. The blow came from behind, hard and sudden. Mox, his second-in-command, a gray-skinned Trellin who'd always seemed friendly enough, had swung a heavy plasma jack straight into Jake's back. Pain exploded through his spine. His knees buckled. The floor rushed up to meet his face. His vision went dark around the edges, swimming with bright spots of light. When Jake finally dragged himself back to consciousness, his head was pounding like a drum. He blinked, trying to focus. Everything hurt. His back, his head, his pride. He tried to move and realized his helmet was cracked. Not broken but cracked. Bad enough. He was alone. Completely alone. His comm unit was smashed into pieces, scattered across the metal floor next to him. His toolkit had been dumped out, tools everywhere, like someone had been searching for something specific. Or maybe they just wanted to make sure he couldn't fix anything important. Like his suit. Like his chances of survival. Jake dragged himself to his feet, using the wall for support. Through a nearby porthole he could see open space. And there, pulling away, was his own ship. The settler's fortune. The vessel he'd worked on for 3 years. The ship he'd kept running when everyone else said it was junk. It was leaving. The engines flared bright blue as it prepared to jump. They were abandoning him. His radio crackled once, barely working through the damaged helmet. Vex's voice came through, and now Jake could hear the smugness in it. Sorry, Harper. Can't have you reporting this find. The dragons will finish you quick. Probably. The transmission cut off. Through the porthole, Jake watched the settler's fortune vanish in a flash of light, jumping to FTL. Gone. He was alone on an ancient alien ship, with a cracked helmet, no working comm, and no way home. Dragons? What dragons? Then he heard it. A sound that came from deep within the ship, so low and powerful that Jake felt it in his bones before he actually heard it. A rumbling growl that made the floor beneath his boots vibrate. It wasn't mechanical. It was alive. And it was big. Jake's hands trembled as he grabbed his flashlight from the floor. The beam shook as he pointed it into the darkness ahead. For a moment nothing happened. Just empty shadows and those weird organic-looking walls. Then the eyes opened. Glowing eyes. Dozens of them. Appearing in the darkness like stars winking into existence. Blue, purple, green. All different colors. All watching him. All moving closer. Jake's throat went dry. His breath came in short gasps. He looked down at his suit's oxygen gauge, the small display glowing in the dark. 5 hours of air remaining. The eyes kept coming closer, and Jake realized that Vex hadn't been lying about one thing. There really were dragons on this ship. And Jake was trapped here with them, with no way out and nowhere to run. They came out of the darkness like nightmares made real, and Jake's first instinct was to run. But his legs wouldn't move. Fear had frozen him in place. Massive serpentine bodies emerged from the shadows, each one covered in crystalline scales that glowed with soft blue and purple light. The glow pulsed gently, like breathing, casting strange shifting shadows across the corridor walls. Their wings were folded tight against their backs, but Jake could see how huge they were. Each wing looked like it could span the entire width of the corridor if spread open. Their heads reminded Jake of pictures he'd seen in old Earth museums. Dinosaurs. Prehistoric monsters from a world millions of years dead. But these creatures had something those ancient bones never had. Their eyes were too intelligent. Too aware. They weren't looking at Jake like he was food. They were studying him. Trying to figure out what he was. The largest one approached, moving with a grace that didn't seem possible for something so big. She had to be 30 feet long, maybe more, from her nose to the tip of her tail. As she circled Jake, her scales shifted color, flowing from deep blue to soft violet like living mood rings. Each scale caught the light differently, creating patterns that hurt to look at too long. Jake's hand dropped to his toolkit out of pure instinct. Like a wrench was going to save him from a 30-foot space dragon. His brain was screaming at him to do something, but what? He couldn't run. Where would he go? The ship was a maze, and these creatures clearly knew every inch of it. He couldn't fight. What was he going to do? Throw a screwdriver at them? So Jake did the only thing that made sense in that moment. The thing that felt most human. He talked to her. "Hey there, big girl," Jake said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. Inside, his heart was hammering so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. "I'm Jake. I'm a mechanic. I fix things." The dragon stopped circling. Her head tilted to one side, and Jake swore he saw curiosity in those glowing eyes. "And I'm betting this ship needs fixing, doesn't it?" Jake continued, trying to keep his voice calm and friendly. The way he talked to a scared dog. Except this dog could probably swallow him whole. "I noticed the power systems are failing. Life support is barely running. You need help." The other dragons, smaller but still plenty big enough to be terrifying, stopped moving. They were listening. Actually listening. Jake took a shaky breath. "Look, I've got 5 hours of air left in this suit. 5 hours, then I'm dead anyway. So how about we make a deal? I help you fix this ship and you don't eat me. Sound good?" The large dragon stared at him for what felt like forever. Jake noticed a marking on her forehead, a perfect crescent shape that glowed brighter than her other scales. Like a moon. He decided right then to call her Luna. If he was going to die, at least he'd give his killer a name. Then Luna did something that made Jake's breath catch in his throat. She moved toward his scattered tools, lowered her massive head, and carefully picked up a wrench with her claws. Not crushing it. Not batting it away. She picked it up, gentle as anything, and placed it at Jake's feet. Then she grabbed another tool. And another. Placing each one carefully in front of him. She was giving him back his tools. "Holy hell," Jake whispered. "You understand me." Luna made a sound, low and rumbling, that might have been agreement. Or maybe she was just humoring the crazy human before deciding whether to eat him later. Either way, Jake felt hope for the first time since waking up alone. But that hope flickered when his oxygen alarm started beeping. 4 hours remaining. The sound was sharp and annoying in the quiet corridor. Luna's head snapped toward the sound. Her eyes fixed on Jake's helmet. For a second, Jake thought she was going to crush it, finish the job Vex had started. Instead, she reached out with one massive claw and gently grasped the sides of his helmet. Her touch was surprisingly careful. Jake's heart raced. This was it. This was how he died. But Luna didn't hurt him. She just studied the helmet, turning it slightly, examining the cracked visor and the blinking oxygen readout. She was trying to understand what the beeping meant. Then she released his helmet, turned, and walked deeper into the ship. She looked back once, her glowing eyes meeting his. The message was crystal clear. "Follow me." Jake grabbed his tools and followed. What choice did he have? Luna led him through twisting corridors that seemed to go on forever. The other dragons followed behind, not threatening, just escorting. After 10 minutes, they reached a large chamber. Old machines lined the walls, some still humming with power. Jake's scanner lit up. The atmosphere reading was climbing. Oxygen, nitrogen, the right mix. Not perfect but breathable. Luna stopped and watched him. Waiting. Jake understood. He slowly reached up and unsealed his helmet. The hiss of equalizing pressure made him flinch. He lifted the helmet off and took a breath. The air was stale and tasted like metal, but it was air. Real air. "Okay," Jake said, his voice shaky with relief. "Still alive. That's good. That's really good." Luna made that rumbling sound again, and Jake could swear she was pleased. Then she turned toward a corner of the chamber, and Jake saw them. 3 smaller dragons, probably young ones, lay curled together in something that looked like a nest. Their scales were dull, barely glowing. Their breathing was labored. They were sick. Luna looked at Jake, then at a damaged control panel on the wall. Wires hung loose. The display was cracked and flickering. Jake understood. She wanted him to help them. She'd brought him here to save her children. Jake spent the first hour just staring at the control panel, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The technology was beyond anything he'd ever worked on. Centuries beyond current tech. Maybe thousands of years. The symbols on the display meant nothing to him. The wiring looked wrong, almost alive. But Jake had been fixing broken things his whole life, and one truth always held steady across every species and every era. Engineering was engineering. Power had to flow from point A to point B, heat had to dissipate or everything melted. Life support had to maintain pressure or everyone died. The basics never changed. He ran his scanner over the panel, watching the energy readings. The thermal regulators were failing. That was the problem. The temperature in the chamber was dropping, degree by degree, and these creatures needed heat. Their bodies were designed for it. Without proper temperature control, they were slowly freezing to death. That's what was killing the young dragons. "Your kids?" Jake asked Luna, pointing at the 3 small ones in the nest. Luna rumbled low, a sound that vibrated through Jake's chest. She moved to the nest and pressed her head gently against the smallest one. The little dragon barely stirred. "Yeah," Jake said softly. "I figured." He rolled up his sleeves and got to work. The dragons watched him with intense curiosity. Jake pulled out his tools and started tracing the power lines, following them back to their source. He needed to understand the system before he could fix it. Every few minutes, he'd mutter to himself, talking through the problem like he always did when working alone. "Okay, so the main power line runs here, but the regulator isn't receiving the signal." "What?" "Because this relay is fried." "But why is it fried?" "Too much current." "So something upstream is broken." Luna tilted her head, following his movements. When Jake needed to hold a heavy cable out of the way to reach a connection point behind it, he gestured helplessly. The cable was too thick to hold with one hand while working with the other. Luna watched him struggle for a moment, then reached out with one massive claw. She gripped the cable carefully and held it exactly where Jake needed it. Jake stared at her. "You understood that. You actually understood." She made a soft chirping sound, almost proud. From that moment, everything changed. When Jake needed light to see into a dark panel, the other dragons moved closer and increased their bioluminescence. Their scales glowed brighter, casting steady light right where he needed it. When he pointed at a specific tool, they'd search through his toolkit and bring it to him. Not always the right one on the first try, but they learned fast. Jake survived on emergency ration bars that tasted like cardboard and water he condensed from the ship's recyclers. It wasn't good, but it kept him alive. He barely slept, catching a few hours here and there, always waking up to find one of the dragons watching over him. Over 3 days, Jake rebuilt the thermal regulation system piece by piece. It was like solving a massive puzzle where half the pieces were missing and the other half were from a different puzzle entirely. He had to improvise, using metal fragments the dragons brought him from other parts of the ship. They seemed to understand what he needed. Conductive materials. Heat-resistant alloys. They cleared debris from his workspace without being asked. They even learned to stay quiet when he was concentrating, sitting still and watching him work. Jake named the young dragons. The smallest one with scales that pulsed with light he called Spark. The middle one who flickered between colors he named Flicker. And the largest of the 3, who maintained a steady glow even while sick, became Glow. As Jake worked, he talked to them, explaining what he was doing even though he knew they probably couldn't understand most of it. It just felt right. "See, the problem is the heating elements aren't receiving enough power. So we need to reroute the main line through this secondary relay. It's not ideal, but it'll work." By the 3rd day he could see changes. As the temperature in the chamber slowly climbed back to normal levels, Spark started moving more. Her scales went from dull gray to a soft blue. Flicker opened his eyes fully for the first time, revealing bright green irises. Glow stretched his wings, testing them. On the 4th day, Jake finally got the main regulator online. The system hummed to life with a sound that was the most beautiful thing Jake had ever heard. The temperature display showed green. Optimal range. The young dragon's scales exploded with color, shifting from dull gray to vibrant blue-green. Spark chirped happily and scrambled out of the nest. She was still wobbly on her legs, but she made it over to Jake and nuzzled against his hand. Her scales were warm now, properly warm, and they hummed with energy. Luna pressed her enormous head against Jake's chest, and the force of it nearly knocked him over. He stumbled back, laughing. Actually laughing. For the first time since Vex had abandoned him, Jake felt something other than fear and desperation. "We did it, girl," Jake said, wrapping his arms around Luna's massive head. "We actually did it." The other dragons made sounds of celebration, a chorus of chirps and rumbles that echoed through the chamber. For a moment, everything was perfect. Then Jake's scanner started beeping. Not the oxygen alarm this time. Something else. He pulled it out and looked at the display. His smile vanished. Deep in the ship's core, energy signatures were building. Power was flowing to systems that had been dormant for centuries. Something was waking up. Something big. And the readings Jake was seeing didn't look like life support or navigation systems. They looked like weapons. His hands started shaking as he watched the power levels climb higher and higher. Whatever was waking up in the depths of this ancient ship, it wasn't friendly. And Jake had a terrible feeling that fixing the thermal regulators had been the trigger that brought it online. The first combat drone emerged from a sealed section at 3 in the morning. Jake had been sleeping in the nest with the dragons because they'd insisted on it. After he'd fixed the thermal regulators, they wouldn't let him sleep anywhere else. It was warm there, comfortable, and honestly Jake felt safer surrounded by 30-foot space dragons than he ever had on the Settler's Fortune. Luna's warning roar shattered the peace and woke Jake instantly. His heart jumped into his throat as he scrambled to his feet, still half asleep and confused. The drone that floated into the chamber was nothing like the peaceful machines Jake had been repairing. This thing was sleek and deadly, its surface covered in weapon ports that were already opening. Red targeting lasers swept across the room, painting everything they touched with crimson light. When the laser hit Jake's chest, he felt his blood turn to ice. Contamination detected, the drone announced in a cold mechanical voice that echoed off the walls. Eliminating non-Forerunner life forms. Jake didn't have time to process what that meant before the dragons exploded into action. Luna moved faster than something her size should be able to move. Her mouth opened and a jet of superheated plasma burst out, hitting the drone dead center. The metal armor melted like butter, dripping onto the floor in glowing puddles. The other adult dragons joined the attack, using their claws to tear at the drone's chassis and their teeth to rip out wiring. But even as they destroyed the first drone, Jake could hear more coming. The sound of metal scraping against metal echoed through the corridors. Lots of them. Jake's mind kicked into gear. He ran to the nearest control terminal, his bare feet slapping against the cold floor. His hands flew across the interface, trying to access the ship's central AI core. He'd spent 4 days learning how this ancient technology worked, figuring out its patterns and logic. But this was different. This system was locked down tight, designed to keep intruders out. Another drone floated into the chamber. Then another. Red targeting lasers swept across the dragons, across Jake, calculating firing solutions. Come on, Jake muttered, his fingers dancing across the controls. Sweat dripped into his eyes but he didn't dare stop to wipe it away. One of the drones locked onto Spark. The little dragon was still weak, still recovering. She wouldn't survive a plasma blast. Jake saw it happening in slow motion. The drone's weapon port glowed, charging up for a shot. Luna saw it too. She threw herself between the drone and her child, spreading her wings to create a shield. The plasma blast hit her square in the left wing. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. Luna screamed, a sound of pure agony that cut through Jake like a knife. Something broke inside him at that moment. These creatures had protected him, fed him, kept him warm. Luna had trusted him enough to let him help her children. And now she was hurt because some ancient security system thought they were threats. No. Jake screamed and his hands moved even faster across the controls. His mind raced, putting pieces together. The AI thought they were intruders. But that didn't make sense. The dragons had been here for who knows how long. They were part of this ship. They had to be. Jake pulled up the biosignature database, his hands shaking. He scrolled through files that were thousands of years old, written in a language he barely understood. And there it was. The dragons were listed as Guardian Project, Success. They weren't invaders. They were crew. Or they had been once upon a time. An idea hit Jake. A crazy, desperate idea. But desperate times called for desperate measures. He pulled up the crew manifest and added a new entry. His own biosignature. His own DNA pattern that the ship had been scanning since he arrived. He listed himself as Guardian, Human Engineer. His fingers hesitated over the confirm button for just a second before he pressed it. The drones paused. Their weapons were still charged, still glowing, but they stopped moving. Like they were receiving new orders. Or trying to process contradictory information. Jake activated the ship's comm system, praying this would work. AI, listen to me. I'm Jake Harper, engineer. I've repaired your thermal systems, your environmental controls, and your power distribution network. I've maintained your guardian units. I've kept them alive. By any definition that matters, I'm crew. Silence filled the chamber. Even the dragons had stopped moving, watching and waiting. Jake could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. And this ship still has a crew that needs her, Jake added, his voice steadier than he felt. More silence. The drones floated motionless, their weapons still hot and ready. Luna was on the floor, her wing bleeding, but her eyes were fixed on Jake. Trusting him to fix this. Just like he'd fixed everything else. The AI's voice finally responded, and Jake could hear something in it. Uncertainty maybe. Confusion. Paradox detected. Human species not authorized for crew status. But repairs to critical systems detected. Guardian units stabilized and functional. Analyzing new data. Jake held his breath. Come on, he thought. Come on, you ancient piece of junk. Think about it. Provisional status. Granted. Engineer Jake Harper is. Crew. The drones powered down. Their weapons went dark. The red targeting lasers disappeared. They simply floated there, inactive, waiting for new orders. Jake let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. His legs went weak and he had to grab the console to keep from falling. They were safe. For now. The AI had a mission, and it explained everything to Jake in that cold mechanical voice. There was data stored in the ship's core. Important data. Information that needed to reach an archive station called Coranthos. 3 months of travel through deep space. The ship could manage it barely. The problem was life support. There was barely enough for one human to survive that long. Jake looked at Luna, who was resting while her wing healed. He looked at Spark, Flicker, and Glow, who were playing together for the first time since he'd met them. These creatures had saved his life. More than that, they'd given him a reason to keep living. I'll do it, Jake said to the AI. I'll take this ship to Coranthos and deliver your data. But the dragons come with me. All of them. That's not negotiable. Guardian units are part of ship systems, the AI responded after a moment. Acceptable. What followed was the strangest 3 months of Jake's entire life. He threw himself into repairing the ship, working 12 and 14-hour days. Every system he fixed made their journey safer. The dragons watched him work and eventually, they started helping in ways Jake never expected. He rigged up biointerfaces, special connections that let the dragons plug directly into the ship's power systems. Their bioluminescence wasn't just for show. It was energy, pure energy, and Jake figured out how to convert it into electricity. When the main generators ran low, the dragons could supplement the power. They became living batteries, keeping the ship running. Food was another challenge. The ship's protein recyclers still worked, producing a gray paste that was technically nutritious but tasted like wet cardboard. Jake and the dragons hunted through the ship together, finding storage compartments that still had sealed containers of something edible. It became a game. Spark was especially good at squeezing into small spaces to retrieve supplies. Luna taught Jake their language. It wasn't words, not exactly. It was sounds combined with color shifts in their scales. A low rumble with blue scales meant contentment. A sharp chirp with red scales meant danger. Jake practiced every day and eventually he could have basic conversations with them. Nothing complex but enough to understand what they needed and wanted. Spark, Flicker, and Glow recovered fully and started playing in the restored corridors. They'd chase each other through the halls, their scales flashing with excitement. Sometimes they'd accidentally break something and Jake would just laugh and fix it. At night, they'd curl up in the nest together and Jake would tell them stories about Earth. About oceans and mountains. About cities full of humans. About his mom's apple pie and his dad's terrible jokes. They became a family. Not the family Jake had been born into, and not the crew he'd worked with on the Settler's Fortune. Something better. Something that chose each other. The journey to Coranthos took exactly 93 days. Jake piloted the ship himself, with Luna sitting beside him in the command center. She couldn't work the controls but she seemed to like being there, keeping him company during the long hours of travel through empty space. When Coranthos finally appeared on the scanners, Jake felt his hands shaking on the controls. This was it. The end of the mission. He decided to rename the ship during the journey. It wasn't just a derelict anymore. It was the Covenant. A promise between him and the dragons to stick together. Jake brought the Covenant down in a perfect landing at the archive station. The station's AI came online immediately, its sensors scanning them. Forerunner vessel detected. Crew composition, 5 Guardian units. 1 human engineer. Mission data received and verified. The AI processed the data Jake had carried across 3 months of space. When it finished, it offered something Jake hadn't expected. Full command codes for the Covenant. Complete control of the ship. It was his now, officially. Jake looked at Luna. She rumbled low, her scales shifting to warm blue. Approval. We accept, Jake said. 6 months later, stories started spreading through the salvage lanes and trade routes. Tales of a mysterious ship that appeared out of nowhere to help vessels in distress. A ship crewed by glowing dragons and one human mechanic. They'd fix your engines if you broke down. They'd chase off pirates who tried to attack cargo haulers. They never asked for payment. Sometimes they'd accept food or supplies, but mostly they just helped because they could. Jake heard the stories when he stopped at trading post. He'd smile and say nothing, letting people wonder. He also heard about Captain Vex. The Solarian was facing serious charges now. Abandonment of crew. Attempted murder. Illegal salvage operations. The list went on. Vex's whole operation had collapsed once Jake's story came out. Turned out other crew members had been abandoned too, and they all came forward once they knew someone was listening. When Vex's name came up in conversation, the dragons would smile. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that showed far too many teeth and promised painful consequences if they ever met again. Jake Harper had been a mechanic left to die on a derelict ship in the middle of nowhere. Abandoned by people he'd thought were friends. Left as food for monsters. But he'd found something out there in the darkness. Something worth more than any salvage, more valuable than any cargo. He'd found a family that chose him. Dragons who trusted him. A purpose that mattered. And every night, when he went to sleep in the nest surrounded by warm scales and gentle breathing, Jake smiled. Because he was exactly where he belonged.